What if the person destroying your confidence, your peace, your relationships isn't doing it by accident? What if the wreckage they leave behind follows the exact same pattern everywhere they go? By the end of this video, you'll understand why some people leave broken friendships, fractured families, and emotionally exhausted partners wherever they go, and why the problem was never your inability to love them enough. Before we begin, I want you to think about one question. Have you ever met someone who somehow made everyone else seem like the problem? If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because today's discussion may explain years of confusion in just a few minutes. Many people assume narcissism is simply excessive self-confidence, but that belief often hides what is really happening beneath the surface. True confidence allows a person to appreciate their own strengths while also respecting the strengths, opinions, and boundaries of others. A genuinely confident individual does not need to dominate every conversation, prove they are always right, or seek constant admiration to feel secure. Narcissistic behavior, however, is fundamentally different because it is driven by an overwhelming need for control. Control becomes the mechanism through which they regulate their fragile sense of self. They may dictate how others think, feel, behave, or even remember events, because losing control can feel like losing their identity. This is why disagreements are rarely treated as normal differences of opinion. Instead, they are often perceived as personal attacks that must be defeated rather than understood. To maintain this control, they may interrupt, criticize, manipulate, guilt trip, or rewrite reality until others begin questioning their own judgment. They are not necessarily trying to win an argument. They are trying to preserve a version of themselves that cannot tolerate feeling flawed, rejected, or powerless. Over time, people around them may find themselves becoming quieter, more cautious, and increasingly dependent on the narcissist's approval. The relationship gradually shifts away from mutual respect and toward emotional management, where one person's needs consistently outweigh everyone else's. This constant pursuit of dominance creates an unhealthy environment because genuine connection cannot exist where freedom, honesty, and emotional safety are replaced by fear, compliance, and the relentless pressure to keep one person feeling important and in control. One of the most painful realities of narcissistic behavior is that relationships are often viewed less as emotional partnerships and more as sources of validation, admiration, and control. Instead of seeing another person as an equal with independent thoughts, feelings, and needs, the narcissistic individual may unconsciously view them as an extension of themselves. As long as the relationship provides attention, praise, loyalty, or emotional supply, everything may appear stable. However, the moment the other person expresses a different opinion, sets a boundary, or prioritizes their own well-being, the dynamic can change dramatically. What should be a healthy disagreement becomes a perceived act of betrayal. This is because the relationship is no longer centered on mutual respect, but on maintaining the narcissist's emotional comfort and sense of superiority. Affection may become conditional, offered generously when expectations are met, and withdrawn when they are not. Conversations often revolve around their experiences, their achievements, or their frustrations, leaving little room for the emotional reality of the other person. When a partner, friend, or family member seeks support, the response may be dismissive, competitive, or redirected back toward the narcissist's own concerns. Over time, the relationship begins to feel emotionally one-sided, with one person constantly giving reassurance, making compromises, and avoiding conflict to preserve temporary peace. This imbalance slowly drains confidence and creates confusion because moments of warmth are often mixed with criticism, blame, or emotional distance. Instead of providing safety and growth, the relationship becomes a place where love is measured by obedience. Acceptance depends on compliance, and emotional connection is replaced by an ongoing struggle to meet ever-changing expectations. Chaos is rarely random in a narcissistic relationship. While it may appear that constant arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional ups and downs simply happen, the confusion often serves a purpose. When people feel emotionally off balance, they become more likely to question their own judgment and rely on someone else for reassurance or direction. This creates an environment where control becomes easier to maintain. One day, a narcissistic person may shower someone with affection, praise, and attention, only to become distant, critical, or hostile the next, without any clear explanation. These sudden shifts leave others searching for answers, replaying conversations in their minds, and wondering what they did wrong. Gaslighting adds another layer of confusion by causing people to doubt their own memories, perceptions, and emotions. Statements like, "That never happened," "You're imagining things," or "You're too sensitive," gradually weaken a person's confidence in their ability to trust themselves. Guilt is also frequently used as a tool, making someone feel selfish for setting boundaries or expressing their own needs. Instead of addressing issues honestly, blame is redirected until the other person feels responsible for problems they did not create. The unpredictability of these interactions keeps people emotionally invested because they hope the warmth and kindness they experienced earlier will return if they just try harder. Over time, this cycle can become mentally exhausting, making even simple decisions feel difficult. Energy that could have been spent on personal growth, meaningful relationships, or pursuing goals is instead consumed by managing emotional uncertainty. In such an atmosphere, clarity fades, confidence weakens, and daily life begins revolving around avoiding conflict, rather than living with authenticity, stability, and peace. Empathy is the ability to recognize, understand, and respond to another person's emotional experience with genuine care. In healthy relationships, empathy creates trust because people feel heard, respected, and emotionally safe, even during disagreements. With narcissistic behavior, however, empathy is often limited, inconsistent, or highly selective. A narcissistic person may appear compassionate when it benefits their image, earns admiration, or helps them achieve a personal goal. But that concern can quickly disappear when someone else's needs conflict with their own desires. They may comfort a friend in public to appear caring, yet dismiss that same person's feelings in private if those emotions require patience, accountability, or sacrifice. This selective empathy makes relationships confusing because moments of apparent kindness are mixed with emotional neglect or indifference. When someone expresses hurt, disappointment, or frustration, the response may be to minimize those feelings, change the subject, become defensive, or even accuse the other person of overreacting. Instead of asking, "How did my actions affect you?" the focus often shifts to protecting their own reputation or avoiding responsibility. As a result, emotional conversations rarely lead to understanding because they become centered on the narcissist's comfort rather than the other person's experience. Over time, loved ones may stop sharing their thoughts and emotions altogether because they expect to be ignored, criticized, or blamed instead of supported. This creates emotional loneliness, even when the relationship continues. People begin feeling invisible, as though their inner world only matters when it serves someone else's interests. Without consistent empathy, trust slowly erodes. Emotional intimacy becomes impossible to sustain, and relationships lose the mutual care, compassion, and understanding that allow people to feel genuinely valued and emotionally connected. If this discussion is helping you recognize patterns that were once confusing, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find information that can make unhealthy relationship dynamics easier to recognize. And if someone you care about needs to hear this, consider sharing it with them. One of the less obvious but deeply damaging aspects of narcissistic behavior is the discomfort they may feel when someone close to them begins to grow, succeed, or become more independent. In healthy relationships, another person's achievements are often a source of pride and encouragement. A supportive partner celebrates your promotion. A true friend applauds your accomplishments. And a caring family member wants to see you become more confident and fulfilled. For a narcissistic individual, however, someone else's success can feel like a threat to their own importance. Instead of viewing your progress as something positive, they may unconsciously interpret it as evidence that they are losing influence, attention, or superiority. This can lead to subtle or direct attempts to undermine your confidence. They may dismiss your accomplishments by saying they were easy to achieve, compare you unfavorably to others, or remind you of past mistakes just as you begin to feel proud of yourself. Sometimes they may interrupt your goals by creating unnecessary drama, demanding constant attention, or making you feel guilty for investing time in your own growth. As your confidence increases, they may become more critical, unpredictable, or emotionally distant because your independence reduces the control they once had. Over time, you may begin questioning your abilities, downplaying your achievements, or avoiding opportunities simply to keep the peace. This gradual erosion of self-belief can prevent personal and professional growth, leaving you stuck in a cycle where your potential is sacrificed to protect someone else's fragile ego. Healthy relationships inspire people to become stronger, more capable, and more confident, whereas narcissistic dynamics often pressure individuals to shrink themselves so another person can continue feeling superior and indispensable. The effects of narcissistic behavior rarely remain confined to one relationship. The emotional damage often spreads outward, affecting families, friendships, workplaces, and entire social circles. What begins as manipulation directed toward one person can gradually create tension between many people, as the narcissistic individual may encourage conflict, distort information, or position themselves as the victim to gain sympathy and maintain control. In families, siblings may be compared against one another, creating jealousy and resentment instead of closeness. Parents and children can become divided when one child is favored while another is unfairly criticized or blamed. These unhealthy roles often continue into adulthood, shaping how family members see themselves and relate to one another. In friendships, the narcissistic person may create misunderstandings by sharing different versions of the same story, leading people to question each other's intentions rather than recognizing the source of the conflict. In professional environments, they may take credit for others' work, undermine colleagues, or spread subtle criticism that damages trust within the team. Children raised in these environments can be especially affected because they learn to prioritize keeping the narcissistic parent emotionally satisfied over expressing their own thoughts and feelings. As they grow older, they may struggle with low self-esteem, people-pleasing tendencies, anxiety, or difficulty recognizing healthy relationships. The emotional atmosphere surrounding a narcissistic person often becomes one of constant tension, where people monitor their words, suppress their emotions, and avoid honest conversations to prevent conflict. This ongoing stress can weaken relationships that might otherwise have been supportive and loving, leaving behind a network of individuals who feel isolated, emotionally exhausted, and disconnected from one another, even long after the narcissistic influence has ended. One of the most difficult truths to accept is that you cannot heal someone who refuses to acknowledge their own harmful behavior. Many people remain in unhealthy relationships because they believe that if they become more patient, more understanding, or more loving, the other person will eventually recognize the damage they have caused and choose to change. While compassion and support can be powerful in relationships, lasting change is only possible when the individual genuinely accepts responsibility for their actions. A narcissistic person often protects their self-image by denying mistakes, shifting blame, minimizing the impact of their behavior, or portraying themselves as the victim. These defense mechanisms make accountability feel like a personal threat rather than an opportunity for growth. As a result, sincere apologies may be replaced with excuses, empty promises, or temporary changes that disappear once the immediate conflict has passed. This pattern can leave loved ones trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, believing that the next conversation, the next compromise, or the next chance will finally produce lasting improvement. Unfortunately, personal growth cannot be forced from the outside. No amount of sacrifice, reassurance, or emotional labor can create self-awareness in someone who consistently avoids it. Real transformation requires the willingness to reflect honestly, tolerate uncomfortable emotions, and take meaningful steps toward changing destructive patterns. Until that happens, the relationship often continues repeating the same painful dynamics. Recognizing this reality is not about giving up on people. It is about understanding the limits of your own responsibility. You can encourage, support, and communicate with compassion, but you cannot do another person's inner work for them, nor can you build a healthy relationship on accountability that only one person is willing to practice. Recovery from a narcissistic relationship does not begin when the other person changes. It begins when you recognize unhealthy patterns and decide to protect your emotional well-being. One of the most important tools in that process is learning to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. Boundaries are not walls designed to punish or reject others. They are clear, respectful limits that define what behavior you will and will not accept in your life. They protect your emotional health, preserve your self-respect, and create space for relationships based on mutual consideration rather than fear or control. After spending a long time in a narcissistic dynamic, many people struggle to set boundaries because they have been conditioned to believe that saying no is selfish, expressing needs is unreasonable, or prioritizing themselves will lead to guilt, criticism, or rejection. As a result, they may continue over-explaining, apologizing unnecessarily, or sacrificing their own peace to avoid conflict. Recovery involves gradually rebuilding trust in your own instincts and recognizing that your thoughts, feelings, and limits deserve the same respect you so willingly give to others. Setting a boundary may initially be met with anger, manipulation, or attempts to make you feel responsible for another person's emotions. But these reactions often reveal why the boundary was necessary in the first place. Healthy people may not always agree with your limits, but they generally respect them because they value the relationship as much as their own preferences. Over time, consistent boundaries help restore confidence, reduce emotional confusion, and allow you to invest your energy in people who appreciate honesty, respect, and emotional balance. They become the foundation for healthier relationships, stronger self-worth, and a life guided by clarity instead of fear or emotional exhaustion. As we come to the end of this discussion, remember that the greatest damage narcissistic behavior causes is not always the arguments, the manipulation, or the broken relationships. It is the quiet erosion of your confidence, your identity, and your trust in yourself. When someone repeatedly makes you question your worth, your memories, or your reality, the emotional scars can last long after the relationship ends. But awareness changes everything. Once you recognize these patterns, you stop blaming yourself for someone else's unhealthy behavior, and you begin making choices that protect your peace instead of sacrificing it. You cannot control another person's willingness to change, but you can control how much access they have to your emotional well-being. You have the right to set boundaries without guilt, to walk away from constant disrespect, and to choose relationships built on honesty, empathy, and mutual respect. Healthy love never demands that you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Real connection encourages growth, celebrates individuality, and creates emotional safety rather than fear. If this message helped you understand a relationship, a family dynamic, or even your own experiences more clearly, share it with someone who may need to hear it. Sometimes a single conversation can become the beginning of someone's healing journey. And always remember this: your peace is not something you have to earn. Your voice is not something you have to silence. And your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.